So I got to
Oh,
ask, just because it's on everybody's minds here in America. Um, what the fuck's going on? I mean, right,
that's what we're all asking about you, but yes, tell me.
right. I mean, you're closer in some ways to what's happening over there in the certainly in the Ukrainian situation, and I'm looking at that, and I'm looking at what Keir Starmer is doing up there in Britain, and I'm looking at what your wonderful Prime Minister is saying these days. And I'm just thinking, man, talk about a progressive kind of nightmare, progressive brouhaha. And you probably saw recently the exchange between Trump, J.D. Vance, and Zelensky, I would think, yes, and how everybody here was just in a complete kerfluffle over it. What is the atmosphere in Italy? Because Italy is definitely seeing its own issues.
Hmm.
Uh,
Well, Italy is pro. Actually, what I discovered, in our we are constitution of the Italian Republic is pacifist. We are pro peace, in part because we know too much of war and even
right.
prolonged war after the official wars are over. Um, so from the outbreak of this thing, and it's very interesting. It's true. Italy is a very interesting place to be, especially because it has a very long historic relationship with Russia in its various forms, the regimes that it's been under, from the Tsardom all the way through the Soviets, Yeltsin's drinking party, into Putin's era, and it's a different perspective.
Mhm.
The European perspective is very different from the American perspective on everything. I also have I've got a lot of connections in Poland, and their view on things is certainly not pro-Russian. The last
Yeah,
people to be pro-Russian, but
they've had
remembering that, uh, remembering that a lot of the atrocities committed against Poland by Russians are what you would now call Ukrainians today, because Ukraine is Russia,
mhm.
and what we call Russia today is the imperial expansion of the Grand Duchy of Muscovy. And so it's a very complex
That is
situation. What's going on over there? What's the perspective? Well, we all saw a few years ago um, externally precipitated regime change in Ukraine,
yes.
from being a buffer state to being a tool for threatening Russia. And we all thought that was probably not a good idea. Shortly following on that, people I know, friends of friends who live in eastern provinces, like Donbass and so on, of Ukraine, um, are ethnically, whatever it means, ethnically Russian, because everybody who's East Slavic is ethnically Rus. It's just a matter of what ancient principality you used to belong to. But they identify as Russian. They don't see the recovery of Russia as a bad thing. Recovery like post-Yeltsin, post-Soviet
Right. Yes.
recovery of civilization, which they are undergoing, whether you like the means or not, the facts are the same. But they voted to secede from Ukraine because they felt that the new regime was unjust and not looking out for their interests. That was their votes were met with bullets, and so Russia stepped in to intervene. There was kind of a standoff, a ceasefire, but then a certain person, President of the United States at the time, had some vested interest, personal family funds, I don't know, weapons of mass destruction, could be chemical implants in any case, right? Things like that. And the new government guy who was there was calling to join NATO, which is, the mission statement of NATO is counterbalance the threat of Russia. In other words, if you're Russia, that means to threaten Russia, all of a sudden on their doorstep. And we all look at that as well. We all, meaning those of us who are more the peaceful European, we want peace for Europe, etc. Look at all this as a lot of really poor decisions setting up cards to go in only one way. Um, and so the official Italian position is, of course, we support Ukrainians. We recognize that That doesn't necessarily mean the Ukrainian state supports Ukrainian interests.
Right.
Russia, it's not good for the state of Russia to invade, but also we have to recognize, of course, that doesn't mean Russians are bad. What concerns me, what concerns I think people who are more educated and familiar with their own recent history in Italy and Germany, for example, is the propaganda that comes out of the United States and out of some of the intelligence, some of the main agents in the EU these days, that it's telling the story that Russian DNA is intrinsically evil. If you're ethnically Russian, you're part of this evil thing. There's no escaping it. And you look at all the propaganda, and propaganda can be good or bad, right? But propaganda it is.
Right.
That is not about Putin. It's not about the current Russian administration. It's about Russians as
Which
something to be exterminated. And
which is
that just echoes pretty awfully of 100 years ago.
I was
We all
gonna
get a
say,
little bit tingly
how's
about that.
how's that different from saying that it's the fault of the Jews, or saying that it's the fault of the French or whatever it is as a people?
Hmm.
That's startling to me, but not surprising in the sense that, honestly, as I said earlier, I think here in the States we are dealing with two United States.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very clear from the fallout of this
Yeah.
conversation between Zelensky and Trump,
Oh
is
yeah.
that
Yeah.
what I see as the biggest takeaway is the two-state issue, is that you've got two states overlapping and he's trying to play one with the other. Or
Yeah.
they're trying, one is trying to play him against the other, and so on.
Well,
Um,
you did see that Zelensky was counseled by the other group to actually come in aggressive from the start. You saw that?
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah, yeah.
they're playing dice with some seriously dangerous dice. I mean, these are like nuclear level dice.
Well, it is a World War III type situation and has been ever since Biden provoked the war.
Yes, yes.
And the demands that were put forward, it's an interesting chess game that what I see is that and I think it's fair to say the Democrats and many Republicans, but the opposition group in the US has been gunning for war with Russia.
Oh yeah,
Many
yeah,
traditional conservatives are also gunning for war. There's
yeah.
something strange. I don't know, something in the water there that makes people want to get into a war with Russia, whether they're left or whether they're on the Democrat or Republican side. They're both
I,
lefties, really.
I
But
don't
uh,
I understand it.
but I see that. So
No.
they're gunning for war with Russia, but then I think there's also what seems. I mean, I see this surprise. Like somebody's trying to start a civil war.
Oh yeah, that's
and
pretty
and
obvious.
so if they could get both or one or the other idea, they're placing things so that it's either going to be the queen or the rook that puts you in checkmate,
Yeah.
but the king is, and I don't like Trump, I'm not saying he's the king, just keep with the chess metaphor. um you know the player here is like, okay, well, which way do I go? It's going to be checkmate one or the other.
Yeah, and
At
this is
least
an
that's the end game they're trying to get to.
I agree, and this is I don't quite fathom why, except for on my very very cynical side, which is that war is always a good way to deplete the population, and I think there's maybe something to that in the progressive mindset. But I'm gonna set that aside for a minute because that's the really
Hmm.
really dark, cynical interpretation. But it's a hard thing to get across that on the one hand, one doesn't have to like Trump at all, but
Hmm.
think about a statesman in that position trying his best to navigate not just foreign affairs, but also that people within his own country are trying to kill him, literally trying to kill him and start a civil
Hmm.
war. I admire a great deal of what's going on right now, but it is such a touchy situation because I can't quite get across to some people that a lot of this is due to CIA activity. It's due to the progressive activity. It's due to the second USA trying to dominate the world basically, and trying to create the brave new world. And so a lot of the coordination between what's happening over there in Britain and what's happening or what's trying to be done here in America is pretty damn obvious. Or the puppet nature of Zelensky's government is pretty damn obvious. But it's obvious if one takes a tack that there are two Americas, and they aren't left and right necessarily, because people who are great hearts who are on the left really don't want World War III. They don't want this to happen, and they're very sympathetic to the plight of some of these people that are suffering under this, but they don't
Hmm.
see that things are going really badly because there's a group of people that want them to go badly. And people on the right, many people on the right, who really want to return, as we said here, or restore certain values and customs and ways of doing things, will get so angry that they gravitate towards these idiots, like I was mentioning earlier of the Tates, which I think the Tates are in some ways a plant. I think that they're actually they're agents in a way.
Oh, probably.
Yeah, but it's tough right now because one has to say what one should say at the right moment, but at the same time I'm thinking maybe the best thing to do is just to keep silent and watch, because it's just it tends to get out of hand very quickly. We'll put it that way. And then yeah,
Hmm.
war, because we start civil war on social media, and then social media civil war bleeds over into real life civil war, which yeah, that's not a fun prospect at all. um, I'm really reminded
Hmm.
too. I hate to say this. I'm not trying to, like, I always do this, but I'm not trying to bring this back to Tolkien. But I'm very much reminded of people in their 30s. What were they thinking
Yeah.
happening there in the 30s? And they didn't know that World War II was on the horizon. They were just thinking the Great War. But there were all these rumblings and movements and agitations, and the Black Hand working over there in Austria-Hungary. And I think there are a lot of folks that were already thinking this is headed our way. So
Right. I mean, I think that's very interesting because you do see people already drawing parallel for some time now to a
yes,
century ago. And though the details you can be mistaken in, but that doesn't negate the reality behind the thing. That if enough people are noticing a certain pattern of similarities and so on, it's got to be there. You just might be wrong about this or that manifestation, but the thing underlying it is there. And I think that's worth paying attention to. And I was reflecting on this just last night. You look at history, we always tend to think that we look at history from our side of the post events
yeah,
and project our perspective on the people prior to the events as though they somehow just know everything that you find out after the fact or during the fact, which you don't. You haven't experienced it yet.
right,
Now, everybody knew World War One was going to happen for a good 20 years prior to that. It
right.
was just a matter of when and where is the hammer going to fall. I mean, you can read letters, you can read published newspapers. People know it's coming because they
Mm.
came so close to it a number of times. And I think actually that's more similar to what we see now in that respect. Everybody knows the big hammer is going to fall. We just don't know when or where or specifically what it's going to look like. 110 years ago, it happened to be the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand.
Right.
It could have been any number of other things a few years either side of that tip it off. You know, they came very close a number of times.
Let me ask something on that score there. I agree with you, and I think in some ways World War II is just sort of like an aftershock from the initial shock from 1914-18. That
Absolutely, and not even aftershock, just the after the we took a breather and then went back at it
yeah,
because
yeah,
nothing was fixed.
yeah,
Wilson made sure that it was ruined and set up for round two.
yeah, Wilson. That's Neil Ferguson's thing. He has this great series called World of War, I think it was called, but just fantastic series. It says exactly this. That in his opinion, this is just a hiatus in a much larger conflict that lasted over 60 years. But if that's the case, I'm still, maybe it's just because this is my idea fix right now, but this progressive thing. Why would the progressives, for lack of a better word, want World War III? Why is it possible that World War One was actually started or brought to a head in almost intentionally, that they were pushing for it and pushing for it and pushing for it?
Well, this is so good. I mean, I think that definitely is the thesis of the adaptation of Sherlock Holmes. Anyway, I don't recall if it's specifically in any of the original authors, Arthur
Arthur,
Conan Doyle's work,
yeah,
but the film adaptation with Robert Downey Jr.
yeah,
Very explicitly is making this claim that Professor Moriarty, is driving things. He's manipulating things to move towards World War One. What we know is World War One. Why? Because he can sell weapons and
yeah.
munitions.
Okay. That's interesting. Yes, and that's a very good insight, and it's one of the reasons I really love those two movies. But yeah, that's a really good insight. I am of the opinion that when the Palisades burned in California, and now apparently the East Coast is having a similar issue, when the
Hmm.
Palisades burned in California, uh, there was so much fishy stuff about that. But now that they're cleaning it up, guess what they're trying to say? They're saying, hey, let's have the government buy up the land and we can make a good, what do they call them, 5-minute cities or whatever they are? A good
Hmm.
into city right here, as a wave of the future, wave of the future, wave of the future. Um,
Isn't that convenient?
isn't that convenient? Isn't that convenient?
Just like the peace deal for Gaza Strip,
Yes,
that
yes.
certain wealthy billionaires are going to make that a real estate investment, still clearing out the natives, still clearing out the Christian communities and Muslim communities that are there, which is precisely what Israel's been trying to do, but then buying it up. So
Yeah.
it isn't, doesn't that when somebody does that, does it kind of smell like there was a conflict of interest all along?
What do they
Like
call it?
maybe you caused it. So this is back to wild boar hunting.
Oh, yeah.
Every Italian peasant knows this particular maneuver. You want your neighbor's you want your neighbor's barn, or you want those acres of pasturage over there. Yeah, well you go boar hunting together. Accidents happen. Because you know how you hunt the boars, you get the dogs chasing them all. You don't have the boar run ahead and you come after the boar. It's not a fox hunt. You want to hunt a boar successfully, you got to circle them in. Well, it used to be you do this with spears and swords and so on. No, they do it with assault rifles. Well, you and your neighbor all of a sudden find yourselves across a circle with a boar in between. Gosh, sorry,
Dang.
ma'am. I hate to tell you, but
It's
I'm
too
going to be
bad.
taking your stuff now. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's funny. Funny. He's in his last breath. He signed over his property to me. Or, for a little less sinister, is you just go. You go and you burn the neighbor's barn down.
Mm-hmm.
The
Mm-hmm.
weather this we've had these wildfires. Had wildfires. Sorry to see your thing burn down.
Yeah, tragic.
Yep. I
Yes.
guess I'll be making the sales this year. But if
Yeah.
you want to sell it to me now that
Yeah.
it's devalued, it's not worth anything to you. I'll take it off your hands.
Yes, and as a widow, you have a hard time taking care of the land anyway, so.
We'll make sure that you're well taken care of, man.
Right. Yes, there's a lot of that, what was called the smell of mendacity, that
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I hmm, I find myself having a harder time laughing about it because it is so manifest right now. Um, but if it's on a small scale there in Hawaii or in the Palisades or wherever, I can see it on a large scale, and that's
Hmm.
devastating. So
I mean, that's how Florida and California became part of the union. Remember?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, we sent you could do something incentive. So like California is a big thing. Incent there's rare precious minerals in
Hmm.
the earth over there. Send some people over there. Send some people. They're not right excavators to go and do that. Incentivize going over there. It's not yours really, but you go over there and but they're your citizens. You send some of your citizens over there, entrepreneurs, and then but they're ruffians, the low lives. Send a couple. You don't even have to all be just a couple of low lives to go cause some trouble. They get into a spat with the locals, and all of a sudden, the locals are fighting against American citizens. You got to send in the cavalry to go protect
Spanish.
interests. And then boom, what do you know? There's a plebiscite, and the people saw the light and the voice of God through the acts of the people. They all vote instantaneously, unanimously, all to become part of the Great Republic.
It's
I mean,
kind of
that's often how many of the smaller states in Italy became part of the new unification project.
I didn't know that.
Um, yeah, same kind of thing is,
Hmm.
we're gonna hold the Duke hostage, or kick him out and take his palace, and then hold a plebiscite and invite only the people on this list of my on my Epstein list, and
Yeah,
they'll be representative of the people. And don't you know the whole province voted unanimously to a person.
yeah. Those are
Um,
strange. Their brakes failed on their car or whatever it was.
I couldn't make it. Yeah, I don't know what happened. It's too bad. Even
Too.
that act of Providence.
I think that happened in Texas to a certain degree too. Texas has brought
Hmm.
a similar sort of thing, although
Sure.
books now tell it a very different way. But yeah, it's
Yeah.
very much that sort of thing. Yeah, and I can't think of other. I mean, there are two reasons why the progressive movement wants to push towards World War III, and both of them are sinister. The one is that
Hmm.
land grab or money grab or whatever it is,
Hmm.
mineral rights grab. But the other one is depopulation. and the two might not be exclusive of each other. Because otherwise, what is what is the reason you would want to get into a global conflagration that will not end well for anybody? Why would you want to get into that?
Hmm.
The reason they give is because America cannot allow people to be subjected by a tyrannical government, or America cannot allow its interests to be threatened, or America cannot stand a dictator to continue to threaten the rest of the world. That sort of thing. So it's this sort of noble patina that's given over on it. But
Hmm.
yeah, I find myself much more cynical these days about that sort of thing from either party, to be honest. And
Yeah, absolutely.
to be quite blunt, I haven't seen a lot of that on the current administration. They have not done it to the degree that the prior administration, plural, have done, because
Hmm.
goes way back. This goes back, I think, to some degree. This goes back all the way to Clinton, maybe a little.
Hmm.
So yeah, a difficult thing to grapple with and hard to talk about because people get so inflamed because you're like, oh, I'm so for the Ukrainian people, or I'm so for the whatever people. That's who isn't? It's not like you're not sitting around saying, I wish every Ukrainian person would die.
But that's the magic of the rhetoric, right? Is that if you, it's the, well, don't you love people? Aren't you merciful? Do you want them all to die?
Yeah,
It's sort of when you bring back the idea that, well, maybe this, that, or the other, I mean, way of doing things was maybe better. Way, this, that, or the other way of farming was maybe better for the earth, better for our health, etc. Or you propose that this, that, or the other technology is maybe actually harmful for people. It's not good for us. It hasn't done good things for society. And the response is, well, you want to go back to the Middle Ages? You want everybody to die? You want to get rid of penicillin?
yeah,
I'm like, where did that come into the? It doesn't actually enter into the discourse. It's this gut level. It's a propagandized reaction.
yeah.
I mean, it's the dystopian sort of thing that they're supposed to respond this way. I mean, they've been programmed to respond this way. No reasonable person responds that way because it's not reasonable to bring that up into discussions that's ostensibly not about pharmaceuticals.
Right, right. And I'm noticing that sort of unreasonable rhetoric coupled with another unreasonable rhetoric that you mentioned earlier, which is those people over there are evil as a people,
Bingo.
and they all need to die, all of them.
Yeah.
And whether it's Russians or Jews or blacks or Muslims or whatever it is, those people.
I mean, under W, it was Arabs,
Yes,
which was mostly actually not Arabs. It was Persians and Pashtuns and Afghans and so on. But like over there people.
I had a real wake up call on that score because, of course, after 9/11 and after I got over my shell shock, I was all
Hmm.
like, wow, George Bush is a really good president. He's really trying to do something. And I'm really encouraged by the fact that he's taking action, the whole ball of wax. And
Hmm.
I had some students who went over there to the Middle East, God love them, just to see what it was like. And they toured around there in the Middle East and they came back and gave a report. These are kids, they're now in their 30s, late 30s.
Hmm.
But these were kids that I really respected as young people. And they came back and they gave a report about how the people were so generous and so courteous and so decent and so kind and really going out of their way to help them. And they occasionally met a nutbag here and there, but everybody on the bus would be like, he's an idiot. He's a nutbag. Don't pay attention to him. So it was
Hmm.
really kind of a wake up call. And I don't know why I'd fallen into it. Well, I'm human, so I fell into this. I'd fallen,
Because the programming works. That's why,
yeah,
I mean, right?
exactly. It's you got to acknowledge the fact that to some degree we're all vulnerable to brainwashing, to being
Hmm.
the human mind can be hacked in that sense. So anyway, I was very grateful to these students because they gave me this real breath of fresh air that yes, these are human beings and they're human beings who are trying their best to be decent people. And occasionally you get this absolute nutbag, but you get a nutbag in Chicago or LA.
Yeah, yeah, I was gonna say, get on the metro in Chicago.
Oh
You don't know
yeah,
what
you
you.
get on the metro here in freaking Minneapolis, and if somebody's standing up there and being like, death to all Jews, or death to all Muslims, and they start stabbing everybody, and that happens. So yeah, it was I was very grateful to them for that, and ever since then I've tried to think, okay, how do you separate the government from the people, and how do you separate the radical elements of the religious sect from the actual religion or the actual people following the religion?
Hmm.
It's a very difficult dance to do, a very difficult intellectual dance to do, but it has to be done. I think it has to be done because otherwise you end up saying everybody in this group is exterminatable. Everybody in this group is liquidatable.
Liquidatable. I begin to doubt whether it's possible to do that and embrace liberalism. And I don't mean what Americans mean by, the left. I mean the progressive, the liberal, the modern nation state, the notion of democracy, because the predicated idea behind the revolutionary liberal, right? I mean, like French Revolution. When I say liberal, I mean also mostly capitalist, right? But broadly, everybody, the whole modern project, because right, isn't the whole idea that the state is the people, and it's the power of the people rising up and voting together, whatever, the voice of the people is the voice of God, if not God, well, is the voice of God. Which God? Well, at least the God of the state, right? The spirit of the nation. The nation and the state are one. The nation consists of the people are the state. There's an inseparable identity, common identity between them. I mean, that's precisely the project of the nation state, is that we are the state is us. Well, once you accept that paradigm, if you disagree with the actions of a liberal nation state, if you say that a liberal nation state is vile, perforce all the people must be vile. It's one body. We are many parts, but one big body. It's a problematic ecclesiology of a state, if you will.
Yeah.
But that's just it, though, isn't it? I mean, I think that I'd hazard to say it's at least worth the hypothesizing that this notion, besides, it's hard to distinguish between the actions of a few people and the whole of them. Now, that's always a problem. We like to generalize, right, our experience from one person to all people of whatever that category is.
A lot easier.
But I think that's played upon by this notion that a state is its people and the people are it. Whereas before, you can have a really shitty king, or a doge elected. Venice was doing the doge first, right? That just means duke, which is that's where the fascist overtones come from. Nobody's really latching onto that explicitly, but that's what he called himself, Il Duce, which in northern dialects is Il Doge, right? The doge is which really means self appellation. I'm not calling Elon Musk a fascist. I don't know anything about him. I'm sure he's a fine guy, but and he may not be. I don't have a dog in that fight. But I don't know. I think if we have that, oh, that's right. You have a bad guy at the head. You always get rid of him, but the people aren't him very clearly. In fact, he may be. I mean, it's him. Maybe it's his family. It's this particular house. The house of Atreides needs to got to get rid of them. It's the other people. The people are the people.
Yes, and I see where you're going. I see what you're saying.
Tolkien was very big on this. This is why I think Tolkien was adamant. I mean, you can tell he feels very passionately about it when asked about his political view. There's one thing he would outlaw draconianly was the idea that it was the term government. He would outlaw that and hang anybody who uses the term.
Yeah.
You're not allowed to, because government is abstract and safe and it's out there. You can't do anything about it. It is us, right? First off, it's also grammatically incorrect because government is not a noun, it's an action, right? It's the act of governing. And so it's not a thing. You can't actually point to, well, the government did this. There's no thing called the government. I hate to tell you, what it is. But you can say like Winston and his gang, or Charles and his cronies. Like, okay, now we know who we're talking about. And it's these particular people are running this place amok, right?
Yeah, Starmer.
Yeah, we talk about Starmer. We can talk about, Oliver Cromwell, and his party ruining all the fun and taking all the drink and cutting off all the heads.
And Christmas outlawed.
Yeah, and Christmas, all these things.
So let me probe this. This is an interesting little bit because, to be quite honest, Cameron, I've never fully understood. I have a couple people that are they call themselves monarchists, and I haven't really quite got my head around all of that. And I don't know whether you fall down in that category or not necessarily, or whether you eschew labels of any kind, as I do. But
Hmm.
there's that famous phrase where Lincoln says, "Government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from this earth." And in America, the tradition has always been, yeah, this is a noble statement. That's what we want. We want the vox populi, right? To
Hmm.
voice of God. Um, we want a government to be governed by the people because that's autonomous. That's what freedom seems to be in this Western culture. But are you suggesting that government by the people is, on the one hand, not possible because government is such an abstract thing that you can't actually have this entity to exist? Or are you suggesting that government by the people is not the best model because it's not actually by the people? Or where are you tinkering with this idea?
Well, I think it's a very interesting question. On the one hand, I'd say, well, first off, I think some of your monarchist friends would probably not disagree with government by the people. They say, well, that doesn't necessarily always mean, certainly doesn't mean a democracy necessarily. It can. That's one kind of government by the people. Remembering that up until a few short decades ago, maybe 7 or 8 or 9 decades ago, the word democracy, of course, meant mob rule,
Right.
right? The crowd, the lynch mob, that sense of mob, not like our kind of mob, the mafia here. That's a bit different. But leaving that aside, because terms evolve, but that government by the people isn't that precisely right? I mean, a monarchy can be described as a government by the people, right?
Okay. Okay.
Because a monarchy is one of the people. He's born into the job. He's one of the families. Next door. He's grown up. He's one of us, right? He's a hometown boy. When you have a small enough territory, that's precisely what a monarchy is. So I think that's interesting, just to be aware of that fact. That some people may agree with the statement, but say it's a much bigger tent than the modern revolutionary, post-revolutionary liberal ones, would admit. Um, that in fact, I know historians who say actually a lot of the post-revolutionary republics are precisely not government by the people. They were imposed on the people by a foreign entity. Recently, the United States doing this. Prior to that, the French Revolutionary Republic or Napoleon's empire imposing these governments by the people. So notably in Italy and Germany and Poland and and um, erecting democratic states is often, more often than not, perhaps, is an imposition on a people from a foreign power, saying we're doing this for your good and our national interest. So there's a bit of one could take it look at that in a cynical route too, and just say, you know, and one could look at well anyway, any number of circumstances like that. But I think the real answer, the most helpful thing at the end of the day, in terms of a positive answer, and not just an unraveling of uh, the thread, the yarn, the false tapestry that's often woven, I think, is the idea that it's not a thing that's scaled even, but rather you can have total democratic rule, as it were, total complete, like everybody it participates in the government at the level of a family. You up a little bit more, 10 times that many people. You can no longer have everybody actively, directly participating in the organization of the management and organization of the group activities and governing of the people. So it becomes a little more representative. You expand that out a little bit more, and and then it gets less. Power becomes more diffused. Less kind of collectivist, and more delegated. But that power has to become lessened as it goes, right? Otherwise, you end up with imbalanced corruption problems. But if by government by the people we mean something like a republic, it necessarily must be small. And perhaps it might be the simple fact that any meaningful unit of human society necessarily has to be small. Um, because then you can have a government predicated on human relationships.
Right.
And I think the phrase that a government by the people, of the people, for the people should never perish feels very sinister to me. Understanding what that government meant and what the government had just done, what that
Yeah.
state, what that individual had just done to a number of what he professes to be his countrymen. Um, you know,
Yeah. I mean, yeah. That. See. Okay. There's a lot there to unpack. I know that I think it was Hamilton in the Federalist Papers is talking about this very issue of size of the government and size of the landmass, and how do you govern a huge landmass like we are going to have eventually, using a local sort of government. He says it's not really possible. You need a federal government to do that, and you have to have some entity that deals with foreign affairs and levying of taxes and trade and the forming of an army and all this kind of stuff. I think that I have thought that there has been a great deal of legitimacy to what Hamilton was writing about, because I think that the local government idea, although it's a very attractive idea, can't deal with certain issues on its own level. So, like Maple Grove, Minnesota, can't deal with an invasion from the South by a Mexican army, for instance, or we can't deal with the levying of high tariffs between Ohio, say, and its neighbors. Our local government has to be exactly that, a government, or a local, whatever we call it, or form.
but this is but that should be the fundamental state, should be the local one,
Right.
and then
And
you have a coalition of these scaling up
yeah, and what I was
that
getting,
has yeah.
that Hamilton seems to suggest that the original concept of federal government was to deal with those issues only, and that all other
Hmm.
issues should be left to the states, as it says in the Constitution. So
Hmm.
when I mean, and again, this is an American experiment. It was never, well, even from the start. I think that they were saying, "Let's try this out. Let's try and think through it. Let's try to work through it." So they were going in the face of some time-honored forms of government in order to craft something they thought would be better than what had been hitherto done under the crown. But what seems to have happened, at least by the 1860s, was that federal government was already becoming so bureaucratic, so removed from the state to state existence, that it was bordering on a bureaucracy, almost a tyrannical bureaucracy. At least that's what the southern states said. Now,
Hmm.
putting the slave issue aside, because that's not, I mean, slavery is bad. There's no doubt about it. And the slave owners were really not good people necessarily. Um,
Right.
and even the idea that states should be able to decide their own fate, in some ways, one could see the legitimacy of saying no, because they would remain perpetual slave states. I can see that argument. But by the 1860s, we're looking at something that was becoming the Leviathan, the Thomas Hobbes Leviathan. And certainly
Bingo.
by the 1880s, when the government was bought out, right, by what's his nose. But anyway, so here the question is, um, from the start, does this idea of creating a government of the people, by the people, for the people, does it have in it the seeds of eventually becoming that Leviathan, or are we dealing with just monarchy, but under a different name? The president of the United States actually being a monarch, and we go about our business in much the same ways that people under a monarch did, with the abstraction that the monarch is not a local boy, as you said, and that the monarch is not a believer. He's not. There's no Christian. There's no faith.
There's no altar and throne thing. United.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, and it's also important to to point out, the modern head of state government of any modern nation state has immensely more power than any, and immensely more resources at his control than any king or
Yeah.
Caesar
Yeah. Right.
had. You
Exactly.
know,
Yeah. Which again is a more modern development, I think. I don't
it
think
is a very modern development. It started actually with the papacy, but yes, and
I thought of that. I hadn't thought of
and
that.
the seeds of that shift, in the papacy in the 11th century with one of the Gregories, I don't know if it's Gregory Hildebrand or whatever, made himself the Bishop of Bishops.
Hmm.
All of a sudden, you've got a monolith above others, and it over time, it's solidified to the point where you have the 16th century. He's king of kings in European states, right? I mean, essentially, he's calling the shots. He's a king among other kings, warring with them, but also controlling the game.
Yeah.
and he's very much the chess master to pit various states against one another. And if they don't do his bidding, he sends the shock troops in, the
Yep.
stormtroopers to
Yep.
go bust some
Yep.
ass.
Happened with the Irish
Um,
Koreans
yeah,
both.
yeah, exactly. And so, and then that evolves into the modern nation state. Is it a monarch? Well, I don't know. What are we talking about when we say monarchy? A monarchy just means a sole head at the helm of what we now call the state.
Mhm.
Of course, it's interesting. In English, we study a state, and we study French history, and we'll look at the pre-revolution, and then you have the post-revolution. They kind of keep some of this, but there were the three estates, right,
Yeah.
and the estates general. And we talk about the word estates. We just use the French word to pretend that it's something different. What we miss is the fundamental fact that in the conception of the time, the conception of organization of society in the late French monarchy, the last of the Louis, and this was universal, like all over Europe. What we call the different estates were understood to be the state. There was the state of the peasantry, the state of the nobility, the state of the clergy, the state of the bourgeoisie, the townspeople, that is to say, townsfolk, city folk, right? So the state of city folk. So city folk were a state. So there
And they were
wasn't
more
the notion of a geographical
right.
delineation of state.
Yeah. Yeah.
These are states because it's a state of life. It's a state of being. You're in this particular, what we now call class.
Yeah.
Um, but they used the word state, and each of these states had a representative place in the management of the kingdom, and it would be more or less overlooked and not have their voices heard, etc., depending. But there are other countries, Norway and Sweden also had these different. The parliament was made up of three or four, sometimes more, sometimes less, different states,
Mhm.
and the king, the monarch, the king or queen, when there was one, would preside over this. But we look at the states in it that just kind of shifting toward the states in Italy, in the sense of the duchies, principalities, and so on. That the pre-unitary states is how we talk about them here. And same for Germany, is that not all of them were monarchies. Some of them were republics, but that didn't mean you didn't have these different states of classes of people with their own sort of representative functions in government,
Yeah.
in the act of government, in the act of governing. So, like the Republic of Florence still had to thrive. I mean, it was ostensibly a bourgeois republic because it's centered around a city, right? City folk, governed by city folk. But there were nobility in the countryside. There was the nobility in the city. There were peasants in the countryside and the clergy, and they had different roles. You
Mhm.
know, um, you see the different ways of doing this in different places across history. So back to your question that we briefly mentioned, do I identify as a monarchist or anything like that? I'll say like a great monarch once said, it's different, republics are not intrinsically better or more evolved than a monarchy. In fact, when you really look at history, many times a republic evolves into a monarchy just as much as vice versa, and that's not a bad thing.
Right.
Um, but that depending on the needs of the place and the time, those people in a particular place and time, they might be organized best as a republic or organized best as a monarchy, and it may be a republic without nobility. It may be a republic, aristocratic republic, in many different ways. It may be a monastic republic like Mount Athos, right?
Yep.
Where they're all, I mean, they're not all clergy, but from the American sensibility, they're all clergy, but they're all monks. Or Lhasa, what is it, the city of Tibet, the Dalai Lama's place, you know,
Yeah.
all of that. There's a lot of different ways that could be done, and I think that's actually what's beautiful again about this is. I mean, I pull it back to Tolkien again because it's a concrete thing that people can feel like not, you know, so like gut reaction about. But he lays out very clear both the Shire and Lothlorien and Gondor and Rohan are all good ways of organizing human society. They all have their strengths and weaknesses, But you've got a monarchy, you've got two of them are monarchies. One is more tribalistic than the other. One is more city-based, right? Rohan and Gondor. You've got Lothlorien, which is God knows really what that is. We don't have a way of categorizing that, the post-revolutionary modern conception. But there's a clear leader, but they're clearly not the despotic monarch that we have
Oh,
caricatured in our mind. If everybody kind of pretty much does their own thing, maybe it's actually just a it's more like a federation of
yeah,
three
Federation.
towns. I mean, that's what Lothlorien is, and the Shire very much the same, right?
Yeah.
Just country folk doing their thing, like some backwater canton in Switzerland.
Mm,
But the backbone of the way that some of the cantons are governed in Switzerland is precisely that Shire model.
yeah.
Um, each
And it,
village has a headman, and they kind of together run the canton. Essentially, how it is.
and that's the old Shiras system in England too. The
Mm-hmm.
Shire of England, where the Shiras would be run by the local, what they call them. It was like not a guild, but a grouping of people, that would get
Mm-hmm.
together, decide various things in communion with one another. So it's pretty.
Right.
Tolkien was talking about. He was talking about this sort of differentiation in the ways that this societies govern themselves. But of course, at the end of the Lord of the Rings, when the king returns, all the lands get incorporated back into a kingship. Which is an
Mm-hmm.
intriguing. And then it goes into the age of men. The elves are.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I wonder if Tolkien was saying that that's categorically a good thing, or whether he was just saying it was a thing. I mean, he had the precedent, for instance, of Numenor, where Numenor had kings, and then they screwed up royally, and so it wasn't like just
Mm-hmm.
having a king was going to fix the issue, because you could have very bad
Right.
kings. Uh,
Right.
what was his name? Farazad, or whatever his name was.
Yeah.
He was not a good guy. uh,
No, not at all.
but when you get to
Literally, Satan worshipping human blood sacrifice
yeah,
messed up
yeah, that
big problems.
categorize you as bad. But then you have, when Aragorn comes to the throne,
Mm-hmm.
Elessar comes to the throne. He is definitely a good king, and the idea is that the land will flourish under him. And there's a very poetic nature to what's being said. But in terms of a real politic, real world
Mm-hmm.
situation, it doesn't guarantee that that age of men that's going to come is going to be without any speed bumps. It's going to be without any issues.
Oh,
Um,
right.
there's an increasing sense I know right now, especially here in the Estats Unis, that a lot of people are just like, federal government, just leave us alone. Leave us alone. Let us do our thing. Let us raise our chickens. Let us commune with one another. Please keep to yourselves and stop mucking around with everybody all the time. And I think
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate that sentiment a great deal. I really do. The thing that I
Yeah.
find very troublesome right now is that the rising Leviathan of the 19th century lent itself to people that thought they knew better than everybody else.
Yes.
That bureaucracy
That's the problem.
was just taken by the progressive movement in the 1880s, and they just ran with it, and they still are running with it. And now, how do you get rid of all that stuff? The attempt right now by the current administration is to bust the hell out of it and to get rid of it. And the revelations certainly that are coming out are quite eye-opening as to just how far the progressives have run the thing into the ground. But I
Mm-hmm.
am skeptical still about the possibility that we can actually escape from this Leviathan. No.
Yeah, I don't know. It's really interesting, and I think that's one thing I think is worth naming, because when we name it, we can start to identify it, and we can identify. If you name the monsters in the room at the
Yeah.
night,
Yeah.
it's not that's not a monster. That's actually that's your coat hanger, and that's your bathrobe hanging on the coat hanger.
The
Now it
parachute.
becomes a
It's the parachute at the top of the hill. Use the
exactly yeah, and it becomes a defeatable thing then. It's not the unnamed dark monster. They go, oh, it's just this. Well, I can take that down.
yeah. Right.
Um, but is it bureaucracy? Literally, I mean, so gratia is power, right? And so the SC part of it, cratie, that's power. And bureau is the French word for office. It's office power. And one thing that immediately should come from that is that it's not just the government bureaucracy, these bureaucrats, functionaries, that's a problem, but that's part and parcel to the same fabric as a universal business culture, right? That these offices and business interests and people who don't have vested interest in what is actually the results of their actions, they're there to get a promotion. Like a world governed by middle managers.
That's
whether
absolutely
they're
true.
part of the corporation of the state, the
Hmm.
corporation of the banking federation, or the corporation of whatever,
Yeah.
HBC, that's another bank, but you know what I mean, like
Yeah.
Target Corp, whatever, pick one. It's all of the same family. It's all the same breed of people, which is why often in the modern state, of course, there's a lot of interchange. They one corporation to another. They'll be in the state, the government, and in a corporation back and forth.
Like Alium.
Um, is that is fundamentally removed from the people, right? I mean, that's bureaucracy. The office, the power lies in office people. It's not even like city folk, townspeople. It's
Yeah.
not warriors. It's middle managers.
Kafka-esque,
Yeah, it is.
very
It
much like
is.
who,
You
who,
want a fun take on it? Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
yeah, right.
There's
Yes.
that breed of aliens. They were so bureaucrat. The ones that clean the boat, whatever. It's its
Yeah.
own.
Yeah.
That's a good picture of it, but it's only a caricature. It's not totally made up. Like it's not. That's actually not false. It's just a slight exaggeration of the reality under which we live in
Yeah. I mean,
modern
you've
society.
you've read Metamorphosis before by Kafka? Have
I
you read
haven't actually. I
it?
haven't actually.
Short read. I highly recommend it. But the premise is he wakes up one morning and finds that he is a large insect, a
I'm a
cockroach.
cockroach.
And of course, most of the work is taken up with his loathing of himself and his family, trying to figure out what to do with him and all this. But the humor of Kafka, you have to like it's like Dostoevsky humor. You have to get it, understand where it's
Hmm.
coming. The humor is that his job doesn't notice that he's gone for several days. And then they finally check up on him, like, oh, he's an insect. All right, well, write him off. There's nothing like, oh my God, this guy's an insect. It's not like freaking out that the guy has been transformed. It's
Yeah. All right.
funny, but it's a horrible kind of funny that Kafka raises there. That's
Because it's one we all too quickly identify with anybody who's worked in an office.
replace that cockroach with another human. It's that sort
All
of thing.
right. Yeah.
And I think that there's something to be said to a great degree that our railing against bureaucracy now does not take into account that we're also railing against, I hate to say this, business and big business and corporations because they are synonymous. They do grease each other's wheels. I was just seeing a whole podcast on this, a conversation where an ex-CIA guy was talking about this revoking of the clearances that Trump has done. And one of the
Hmm.
done this, he's revoked the clearances of people that are being booted out of the CIA and FBI and
Okay.
government positions. And one of the reasons he's doing it is because those people will go when they get out of a career in CIA, they'll go to a private industry and they'll take with them their credentials so that the private industry now has access through its access codes to all these other contacts and documents and ideas that
Hmm.
float around the CIA. And so you can make a 6-digit salary guaranteed by going to a private firm after several years at the CIA. But if you don't have those clearances, you're just another guy at an office table. And
Right.
so a lot of young people, this commentator was saying, a lot of young people are not they're actually leaving the CIA now because they realize that a long career in the CIA, which doesn't pay that much, is not going to guarantee them this 6-figure salary later on. They might as well go into the private industry immediately. Now, whether that serves to be a brain drain and therefore a bad thing, or whether that serves to be a power drain and therefore a good thing, where the CIA is like no longer capable of meddling in things on the other side of the planet, I don't know yet. But it is interesting to note that it's a bureaucracy model that is being busted up.
It's very much a bureaucracy model, and I know that that's common enough across all government agencies and military as well. You go into private life then afterwards, and you maintain those credentials. Maybe officially, in many cases, you're not supposed to, but they do, and
Yeah.
then that's now taking the state into the service of private commerce, which
Yeah.
is a bad thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, not ideal. And I again, I'm reflecting in the back of my head upon our professor and how he must have been aware of so many of these different things. And instead of choosing to rail against them publicly and to write treatises the way Chesterton did or Lewis did, he goes and he writes this magnificent other world as an
Hmm.
escape, as he says, in his great letter. This is an escapism of the best kind.
Right. And I think not only in this, and this is why, and I want to put back to the conversation we've had some time ago now. Why is there such a vitriolic reaction against Tolkien
Hmm.
from some quarters? Is because he's not merely an escape, in the sense that you can read this and enter into a beautiful life for a while and escape your terrible, dungeon-like office existence. Though it can be that, is that it's also a map. It's not an escape just in the sense of cool, I can check out. I can,
Yeah.
mentally escape. Well, my body still lives in cockroach land. Um, but that it, if you start reading it, and what if you started to put into practice, or you started to live, or you
Mhm.
tried to live, God forbid, get other people excited about maybe emulating some of what you see in there, that's revolutionary.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
The
There's a line
the
that Thorin.
book, the whole legendarium, is a treasure map. It's an escape map. It says, here's how to get out of the cave. Here's the pathway.
Yeah.
No guarantees, but
Yeah.
this is how it can be done.
There's a great
You might
line.
still have, yeah.
There's a great line by Thorin to Bilbo on his deathbed, about how if more of us treasured good food and drink,
Hmm.
it would be a merrier world.
Yeah.
That runs throughout Tolkien. And I agree with you. I honestly think that the attempt to undermine Tolkien has been a conscious attempt. Jeff Bezos,
Oh,
one of
absolutely.
the people that made the projects recently, have been, I think, consciously trying to gut the work.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely the case. Um, no, absolutely trying to gut it.
And
And because it's at the same time as, because, certain countries, dear leaders are quite fond of Tolkien. That fact was used as a weapon against them,
I
to say, therefore, Tolkien used the Tolkien
it's
as a fascist.
right. You are Sauron. You are our Farzan. We're not going to stand for it. And so, yeah, definitely. But
Well, I mean, in the sense that, you like this, and now you're in power, you might start to favor things like a return to Hobbiton, and we don't want that because we're actively working for Saddam, and
right,
we prefer the Uruk Hai, which is why you try and paint, back to Bezos's, projects, is that you try and paint the orcs in a sympathetic light. Orcs are people too. It's like, no, it's kind of not what they are. But you've now changed the
oh,
universe.
yeah, yeah. That's yeah. Okay, so
You're
like a
trying to make us feel sympathy for
yeah,
the
right.
industrialists.
These orcs that
Warlocks are good.
these guys that work in these orcs that work in the Amazon plants, they're just they want a family. Bezos, I don't know the man personally, but
He's
class,
just making money off of it, but whoever his cronies are that are making the production.
right, right. But Bezos as a sort of pinnacle of this trickle down structure,
Yeah, yeah.
democracy, which is in league with the government thing too. So yes, there's very
Well,
much kinship between the two that we
it
talk.
is a government.
It is
These massive companies are governments.
right.
Anybody from a different era in history would point and say, no, Google is a state.
Yes, right. So yeah,
Because historically, states were not mutually incompatible. You could have multiple overlapping states and
sure.
allegiances, and that's how feudalism works, right? Is that you've got multiple alliances, multiple levels of, relationship, complex relationship. But
Yep.
yeah, I mean, that's
So what you're saying here, Mr. Bezos or whoever, is that the rising tide of this thing is the future, and we should simply join with it. We shouldn't try to fight it anymore. It's inevitable, right? Which is exactly what Saruman says to Gandalf, right? That this is the wave of the future, so to speak.
the way of the future. Resistance is futile.
Business is
Just
futile.
plug the chips into your flesh and
Cross,
become part of the hive mind.
yeah, to cross pollinate our collective geekery. But if, for instance, you rise to a position of power, as a certain PM in a certain Italian-like country would do, and you happen to be steeped in Tolkien, as a certain PM happens to be, then you go around saying certain things, like it's wrong to disrupt the hegemony and cause lots of destruction and death. It's wrong to push ideals that are contrary to the family. It is wrong to promote abortion and the killing of the most innocent members of our society. Crazy stuff, right? But crazy stuff which definitely stands in the way of this bureaucratic, corporate World War III Kafkaesque cockroach nightmare
Mm-hmm.
that does seem to be on the ascendant to a certain degree. So Tolkien, Tolkien
Yeah.
offers an escape, and he offers a roadmap, and he also offers, if I may, a weapon, a tool, a thing, a sword to be able to defend the things.
It's not the ring. It's less like the ring and more like the file of Galadriel.
Yep.
It's a
Yeah,
weapon of that sort, not that sort.
and he loves not the sword for its keenness or brightness, but because of what it defends.
Oh goodness, what was the thing I just read from Ithilien? And oh yes, and everybody knows that line. Anybody who's worth talking to knows that line. What does come after it? He said, and I love Gondor, I love my city, and I would have her love, not for her warriors or whatever, but for her, her culture, for her beauty, for her gentleness, and that she should be a queen among many queens, not the queen among many queens, not you know, a wicked tyrant over many slaves,
Mm,
even a benevolent tyrant over willing slaves. And there, in a nutshell, you have Tolkien's both his ecclesiology and his say political views, state preferences, whatever would not call political views, his idea of the state, his ecclesiology both of church and state,
mm,
is that a lady among many ladies, it would be the ideal city, not a despot, however benevolent, over slaves, even willing slaves.
fleeing slaves. Yeah.
And that right there, I mean, like Faramir is peak life philosophy.
Yeah, that's grand. I love that. I love that.
And I think really important, I mean, to run with a good thing here, um, what's very practical right now and in the coming years, potentially decades, very practical for whoever's listening to this. You find yourself in a position of all of a sudden holding the reins of life or death over one or many people, is that the laws of Denethor laid down the law that you find anybody in Ithilien who's not a soldier of Gondor, you need to slay him on sight. And Faramir does not do this, but he tries to weigh a hard thing well and
Yeah.
do the just deed, regardless of the commands of the potentate behind him.
Yes.
And I think that's very important, very practical, whether you find yourself in Eastern Mediterranean or in Western Ukraine or in Southern Illinois.
Right. Exactly. That hotbed of dissension. It's a good place to stop. We still need to talk about the influences of Tolkien because I'm still kind of keen on this artwork business, and we still need to talk about the coming of men into the West, which is chapter 17. But we'll get to it. We'll get to it. No.
Well, don't be hasty. Don't be hasty.
All right, my friend. Take care of yourself. Keep your head
You
down,
too.
and good luck with finding some domicile to keep the rain out.
Yeah, thank you. That's the goal. Just
All right.
keeping a wolf from the door, as
Keep the
Farmer John
wolf.
has said.
Or yeah, good for you. All right. Take care. Bye bye.
Take care.